1995. An NHRA driver just won another race. But instead of celebrating, he did something absolutely insane. He stripped down to his underwear on national television. His crime? Winning so much that people accused him of cheating. This is the story of John Force, the man who dominated drag racing so hard, they thought it was impossible to be that good. And what happened next changed the sport forever. John Force wasn't supposed to be a champion. He was a truck driver from California with barely enough money to keep his car running. While other teams had massive corporate sponsors and state-of-the-art equipment, John was literally sleeping in his truck at racetracks, eating cheap food, and working on his own car with duct tape and hope. But what he lacked in money he made up for with something his competitors couldn't buy: an unbreakable will to win and a work ethic that bordered on insanity. In 1987, after years of struggling, John Force finally broke through and won his first NHRA Funny Car Championship. The racing community smiled and thought, good for him. He earned it. They had no idea what was coming. But here's where the story gets absolutely wild. 1988, John Force wins again. Okay, back-to-back champion, impressive. 1989, he wins again. Now people are paying attention. 1990, again. 1991, again. By 1993, John Force had won 7 championships in just 8 years. The only year he didn't win? 1992, when Cruz Pedregon barely beat him. And John came back angrier than ever. This wasn't just dominance anymore. This was complete and total annihilation of the competition. Race after race, championship after championship, John Force was turning NHRA funny car racing into his personal playground. His win rate was obscene. His reaction times were superhuman. His consistency was something the sport had never seen before. And that's when the whispers started. And what happened next shocked the entire racing world. In the garage areas, in team meetings, in sponsor offices, the same question kept coming up over and over: how is this even possible? John Force wasn't from a racing dynasty. He didn't have the biggest budget. He wasn't even the most naturally talented driver when he started. So how was he beating teams with twice his resources and drivers who'd been racing longer than he had? The accusations started small. He must have found some technical loophole. Then they got louder. His car has to be illegal. Then they got personal. He's cheating. There's no other explanation. Teams demanded his car be inspected. NHRA officials tore his funny car apart bolt by bolt, measuring every single component, checking every specification. The result? Completely legal. Every single time. But that didn't stop the accusations. If anything, it made people more suspicious. How could someone win this much and not be cheating? It was unprecedented. It was unbelievable. Well, it had to be impossible, right? Then came the moment that would define John Force's legacy forever. 1995, John Force had just won another race. Another dominant performance. Another trophy. But as he stood there, listening to the crowd cheer and the announcements being made, he could hear the boos mixed in with the cheers. He could see the angry faces of competitors. He could feel the resentment building. The sport he loved, the sport he'd given everything for, was turning against him. Not because he was doing anything wrong, but because he was too good. And John Force had had enough. In front of thousands of fans, in front of television cameras broadcasting live, John Force did something absolutely shocking. He started stripping. Not as a celebration, not as a joke, but as a statement. He pulled off his racing suit, piece by piece, until he was standing there in nothing but his underwear. The crowd went silent. Commentators didn't know what to say. And John Force looked directly at the cameras and said words that would echo through racing history. You want to prove I'm not cheating? Check me. Check my body. Check my suit. Check everything. Because I'm not cheating. I'm just that damn good. The image of John Force standing in his underwear, challenging his accusers, became one of the most iconic moments in NHRA history. But the controversy was far from over. In fact, it was about to get much, much worse. After that infamous underwear moment, you'd think the accusations would stop. You'd think people would finally accept that John Force was just legitimately better than everyone else. But that's not what happened. Instead, the controversy exploded into something even bigger. The 1995 incident made national news. ESPN was talking about it. Major sports networks were covering drag racing for the first time ever, not because of the racing, but because of the drama. And John Force? He just kept winning. If anything, the controversy made him more determined. 1996 rolled around, And Force didn't just win the championship, he dominated it with a record-breaking season. 10 event wins. 10. In a single season. His closest competitor wasn't even close. He was lapping the field metaphorically. Every race weekend became the same story. John Force qualifies first. John Force wins the race. John Force celebrates while everyone else shakes their heads in disbelief. But what NHRA did next would change everything. Behind closed doors, team owners were having emergency meetings. Sponsors were threatening to pull funding because their drivers couldn't compete. Television executives were worried that fans would stop watching if every race became predictable. And NHRA officials were facing the impossible question: how do you fix a sport when the problem is that one guy is too good? The answer? You change the rules. Between 1996 and 1998, NHRA implemented multiple rule changes that seemed oddly specific. New weight requirements. Engine specifications adjusted. Clutch regulations modified. Fuel mixture rules altered. Aerodynamic restrictions introduced. On paper, these were presented as competitive balance adjustments and safety improvements. But everyone in the sport knew the truth. These were the John Force rules. Changes specifically designed to slow him down, to level the playing field, to give other teams a fighting chance. And here's the craziest part: he didn't work. And what John Force did next was absolutely legendary. With all the new restrictions in place, John Force won his 10th championship. 1998, 11th championship. 1999, 12th championship. The man was literally unstoppable. Every rule change meant to slow him down. He adapted. He evolved. He found new ways to win. His crew chief, Austin Coyle, was a mechanical genius who could optimize performance under any rule set. Together, they were turning restrictions into challenges and challenges into victories. Other teams were spending millions trying to catch up. They hired new engineers, bought better equipment, studied Force's every move. Nothing worked. By the late 1990s, John Force wasn't just winning championships anymore. He was rewriting the record books entirely. Most career wins. Most championships. Most consecutive final rounds. Fastest speeds. Quickest times. Every meaningful record in funny car racing had his name on it. But the real controversy was only just beginning. The accusations got darker. More personal. More desperate. Some competitors started suggesting that Force had insider connections with NHRA officials. That maybe he knew about rule changes before they were announced. That maybe his inspections weren't as thorough as everyone else's. These weren't just racing rivalries anymore. This was character assassination. John Force, the working-class truck driver who built himself into a champion through pure grit and determination, was now being painted as some kind of villain. A cheater. A manipulator. Someone who was ruining the sport. The irony was painful. Force was bringing more attention to NHRA than it had ever received. Attendance was up. TV ratings were climbing. Sponsorship money was pouring in. But instead of being celebrated as the greatest driver in the sport's history, he was being resented for being too dominant. The psychological toll started showing. John Force, known for his energetic personality and non-stop talking, started becoming more defensive in interviews. More angry. More bitter. He'd won everything there was to win. He'd proven himself 1,000 times over. He'd submitted to every inspection, every accusation, every attempt to tear him down. And still it wasn't enough. Still, people doubted him. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed John Force's career forever. The year 2000. John Force was chasing his 13th championship. At a race in Memphis, Tennessee, something happened that would push the controversy to its absolute breaking point. After Force won the race, a competitor filed an official protest. Not just a casual complaint, a formal, written protest demanding Force's car be completely disassembled and inspected down to the molecular level. NHRA had no choice but to comply. For 6 hours, officials took apart Force's funny car piece by piece. Every bolt, every wire, every component. The entire racing world watched and waited. If they found something, anything illegal, John Force's entire legacy would be destroyed. Every championship questioned. Every record tainted. His career would be over. Not just over, erased from history. The inspection took so long that Force's team missed their flight home. John sat in the garage, watching strangers dissect his car, knowing that his entire life's work hung in the balance. And the result? The inspection results came back. 6 hours of tearing apart every single component of John Force's funny car. The most thorough technical inspection in NHRA history. The verdict? Completely legal. Not a single violation. Not even a minor infraction. The car was 100% within specifications. You'd think this would finally end the controversy. You'd think this would finally prove to everyone that John Force was just legitimately the best driver in the sport. But somehow, it made things worse. Because now, competitors couldn't even blame illegal parts anymore. They had to face the uncomfortable truth: John Force was beating them fair and square. And that made them even more angry. The protests didn't stop. They increased. Almost every race, someone was filing a complaint, demanding another inspection, another teardown, another delay. It got so bad that John Force's team started joking that they should just leave the car partially disassembled to save time. But underneath the jokes, there was real frustration, real exhaustion, real damage being done. But what NHRA officials decided to do next was absolutely unprecedented. Behind closed doors, NHRA held what insiders later called the Force Meeting. Team owners, sponsors, television executives, and NHRA officials gathered to discuss one topic and one topic only: the John Force problem. Not the John Force success story. Not the John Force phenomenon. The John Force problem. Because that's what the greatest driver in their sport's history had become. A problem they needed to solve. The discussions were heated. Some team owners demanded even more rule changes. Some wanted a cap on how many races a single driver could win in a season. One owner allegedly suggested that Force should be required to give other teams his setup information to level the playing field. These weren't just desperate suggestions. These were serious proposals being considered by the sport's governing body. Think about how insane that is. Imagine if the NBA told Michael Jordan he could only score 20 points per game because he was too dominant. Imagine if the NFL told Tom Brady he could only throw 2 touchdowns per game to make it fair for everyone else. That's essentially what was being discussed for John Force. And then something happened that shocked everyone. John Force won his 14th championship in 2002. His 15th in 2004. By 2006, he'd won 16 funny car championships. But here's what most people don't know: during these years, Force was racing under more scrutiny than any driver in motorsports history. Every single race weekend his car was inspected. Not random inspections. Every race. Before qualifying. After qualifying. Before eliminations. After wins. His team spent more time being inspected than some teams spent actually racing. The technical inspectors knew Force's car better than their own homes. They measured every specification down to thousandths of an inch. They checked fuel samples. They analyzed computer data. They weighed components. And every single time, the result was the same: legal. But the message was clear. NHRA didn't trust him. They were watching his every move, waiting for him to slip up, hoping to finally catch him doing something wrong. John Force was essentially racing under probation despite never being convicted of anything. Then came the incident that nearly broke John Force completely. Funny car had become so dominated by John Force that his own daughters were now beating everyone else too. Ashley Force and Courtney Force had joined the circuit, and they were winning races too. The Force family was now occupying multiple spots in the championship standings. Competitors started calling it Force Racing instead of NHRA Funny Car Racing. The resentment reached a boiling point at the U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis, the sport's biggest race. John Force qualified number 1. As he pulled into the staging lanes for his first elimination round, something unusual happened. A technical inspector approached and informed Force that his car was selected for a random pre-race inspection. But here's the thing: Force's car had already been inspected 3 times that weekend. This would be number 4. And it was happening right before the most important race of the season. The timing was suspicious. Too convenient. Too targeted. Force protested. His team protested. They argued this was harassment, not inspection. That this was an attempt to rattle him mentally before a crucial run. That after years of perfect inspections, this random check was anything but random. What happened next became the most controversial moment in NHRA history. NHRA officials refused to back down. They insisted the inspection would proceed. John Force was given a choice: submit to the inspection and potentially miss his race run, or refuse and be disqualified. He submitted. But something inside him snapped that day. After the inspection cleared him, again, Force went to the starting line. He won the race. He won the event. He won his 15th championship that season. But in his victory speech, John Force did something he'd never done before. He broke down. Tears streaming down his face, voice cracking with emotion, he told the crowd, "I've given everything to this sport. Everything. And they still treat me like a criminal. I don't know how much longer I can do this." The crowd went silent. This wasn't the confident, larger-than-life John Force they knew. This was a broken man who'd been pushed to his absolute limit. A champion who'd proven himself 1,000 times over, yet still couldn't escape the shadow of suspicion. The sport had created its greatest legend, and then spent decades trying to tear him down. After that emotional breakdown at the U.S. Nationals, something shifted in the NHRA community. For the first time, fans and media started asking uncomfortable questions. Had the sport gone too far? Had they broken their greatest champion? Social media was just starting to explode in 2007, and suddenly John Force had an army of supporters defending him online. Forums filled with debates. Fan pages demanded NHRA stop the harassment. Major sports outlets ran stories questioning whether this was the worst case of tall poppy syndrome in motorsports history. But the damage to John Force was already done. The constant inspections, the endless accusations, the years of being treated like a cheater despite never cheating, it had taken its toll. Force's relationship with NHRA officials became ice cold. Press conferences became tense. The fun-loving, trash-talking personality that made him a fan favorite started disappearing. He became guarded, defensive, paranoid even. Can you blame him? When you're inspected before every race, when every win is questioned, when your own governing body seems to want you to lose, it changes you. But then something happened that nobody saw coming. John Force didn't win the championship. For the first time in years, someone else stood on top. Some competitors celebrated like they just won the Super Bowl. Finally, the John Force era was over. The sport could return to normal. Multiple winners. Competitive balance. Unpredictability. It wasn't over. Not even close. 2009. John Force came back hungrier than ever. But something was different. He wasn't racing angry anymore. He wasn't racing defensive. He was racing free. Like a massive weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Maybe it was the year off from winning that reset him mentally. Maybe it was finally accepting that no matter what he did, some people would never believe in him. Whatever it was, the John Force who showed up in 2009 was different. More focused. More dangerous. More unstoppable than ever before. And what he did next silenced his critics forever. John Force won his 16th championship in 2010 at age 61. 61 years old. An age when most racers are retired, sitting at home, telling stories about their glory days. And Force was out there beating drivers half his age. Setting track records. Posting the quickest times. Proving that age, rule changes, constant harassment, nothing could stop him. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. By 2013, something remarkable happened in the NHRA garage area. The protests stopped. The accusations faded. The random inspections became actually random. But because a new generation of drivers had entered the sport. Drivers who grew up watching John Force. Who idolized him. Who didn't see him as a threat to beat, but as a legend to learn from. These young drivers started seeking Force's advice. Asking him about setups. About racing strategy. About how to handle pressure. And Force, despite years of being treated like an outsider by his competitors, welcomed them with open arms. He shared knowledge. He mentored. He helped the very people trying to beat him become better racers. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. In 2015, a documentary crew was given behind-the-scenes access to NHRA for an anniversary special. During interviews with former officials and team owners, something incredible came to light. Several people, now retired and willing to speak freely, admitted the truth. The rule changes. The constant inspections. The targeting. It was all real. It was all intentional. NHRA had, in fact, been trying to slow John Force down for years. Not because he was cheating, but because his dominance was making the sport too predictable. Because sponsors were threatening to leave if their teams couldn't compete. Because television networks wanted closer championship battles. They had sacrificed their greatest champion on the altar of competitive balance. One former official said something haunting in that documentary: "We thought we were saving the sport. Looking back, I think we were just punishing excellence." The admission sent shockwaves through the racing community. John Force had been right all along. He wasn't paranoid. He wasn't imagining things. The system had been rigged against him. And he'd beaten it anyway. And here's where John Force proved he was truly legendary. When the documentary aired and these confessions went public, people expected Force to explode, to demand apologies, to sue, to trash NHRA in interviews, to finally unleash years of pent-up anger and frustration. Instead, John Force gave one short statement: "I always knew. But I didn't race to prove them wrong. I raced because I love this sport. And I always will." That was it. No anger. No bitterness. Just pure love for drag racing. The man who'd been harassed, targeted, and doubted for decades responded with grace. It was the ultimate victory. Not just over his competitors on the track, but over the entire system that tried to break him. By 2020, John Force had won his 16th and final championship at age 71, making him not just the oldest champion in NHRA history, but cementing his legacy as the most dominant, most resilient, and most unfairly treated champion in motorsports history. His career stats are almost impossible to believe: 16 funny car championships, over 150 national event wins, more victories than any driver in NHRA history, decades of dominance spanning 4 different generations of competitors. And he did it all while racing under more scrutiny, more pressure, and more resistance than any champion in any sport has ever faced. Today, John Force is 75 years old. And guess what? He's still racing, still competing, still showing up every weekend with that same fire he had as a broke truck driver in the 1980s. But the story doesn't end with just his legacy. Because what John Force went through fundamentally changed NHRA forever. After those documentary revelations in 2015, NHRA was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth: they had created their own villain out of their greatest hero. The backlash was intense. Fans demanded reforms, transparency in rulemaking, fair inspection protocols, an end to targeted enforcement. And slowly, NHRA started changing. They implemented standardized inspection procedures, made rule changes more transparent, created appeals processes for teams who felt unfairly targeted. Essentially, they built protections to ensure no driver would ever be treated the way John Force was treated again. The irony? These changes came too late for Force, but they protected every driver who came after him. But here's the part of this story that'll blow your mind. Despite everything, the harassment, the accusations, the system working against him, John Force never became bitter. He never left the sport. He never badmouthed NHRA publicly. Instead, he built an empire. John Force Racing became one of the most successful teams in motorsports history. He gave opportunities to young drivers, mechanics, crews, people who reminded him of his younger self, hungry, talented, but without resources. He turned his team into a family. His daughters, Ashley, Brittany, and Courtney, all became successful funny car drivers. His son-in-law, Robert Height, won multiple championships under the John Force Racing banner. The man who was treated like an outsider created the most inclusive, successful team in the sport. And his competitors? Many of them have now publicly admitted they were wrong. Drivers who once protested his wins now call him the greatest of all time. Team owners who demanded rule changes now praise his work ethic and talent. Even some NHRA officials have privately apologized for how he was treated. So what's the real lesson from John Force's story? It's this: excellence will always make people uncomfortable. When you're so good at something that you make it look easy, people won't celebrate you, they'll question you. They'll doubt you. They'll try to find reasons why you don't deserve your success. John Force's crime wasn't cheating. It wasn't breaking rules. It wasn't doing anything wrong. His crime was being undeniably, unquestionably, unstoppably great. And in a world that loves underdogs but resents sustained dominance, that made him a target. Think about it in your own life. How many times have you held back from being your best because you didn't want to make others uncomfortable? How many times have you dimmed your light so others wouldn't feel overshadowed? John Force's story teaches us that real champions don't apologize for excellence. They don't shrink to make others comfortable. They keep pushing, keep improving, keep winning, even when the entire system is designed to stop them. And here's the final twist in this incredible story. In 2023, at age 74, John Force won another NHRA national event. Not because he needed the money, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he genuinely loves racing. The kid who slept in his truck and ate cheap food to afford entry fees? He never left. That hunger, that passion, that pure love for the sport, it's still there after 5 decades. And the sport that once tried to push him out? They now celebrate him as their greatest ambassador. His face is on promotional materials. He's featured in NHRA commercials. He's invited to every major event as an honored guest. The relationship has healed. Not because NHRA suddenly decided to appreciate him, but because John Force's legacy became so undeniable that even his harshest critics had to bow down and acknowledge greatness. Today, when young drivers enter NHRA, they don't hear stories about John Force the cheater. They hear stories about John Force the legend, the man who won 16 championships, the driver who changed the sport forever, the champion who faced impossible odds and conquered them all. So was John Force blacklisted for winning too much? Not officially. He was never formally banned, never suspended, never kicked out. But he was absolutely targeted, absolutely harassed, absolutely subjected to treatment that no other driver in the sport's history has faced. They tried to legislate him out of dominance, inspect him into submission, create rules specifically designed to slow him down. And he beat every single one of those obstacles. John Force's story isn't just about drag racing. It's about what happens when you refuse to be broken. When you face a system designed to stop you and you win anyway. When you turn your haters into your biggest legacy. The next time someone tells you you're too successful, or too dominant, or winning too much, remember John Force. Remember the man who stripped to his underwear to prove he wasn't cheating. Remember the champion who raced under constant suspicion and still won 16 titles. Remember that excellence doesn't need permission. And sometimes, the greatest revenge against those who doubt you is simply to keep winning. That's the John Force story. The driver NHRA couldn't stop. The champion who proved that talent, determination, and heart will always beat politics, jealousy, and a rigged system. If this story inspired you, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you think. Was NHRA wrong for targeting John Force? And subscribe Regal Rides because we're bringing you more untold stories from the world of motorsports. This is the kind of content you won't find anywhere else. Real stories. Real legends. Real controversy. See you in the next one.